Let's talk about three places most people have never heard of. Not because they're unimportant, because history forgot them. Or tried to. These aren't lost cities from movies. They're real. They exist right now. And the stories behind them are stranger than anything Hollywood could write. Let's start in West Africa. The Cliff People of Mali. There's a cliff in Mali that stretches for 150 kilometers. It's called the Bandiagara Escarpment. It rises about 500 meters from the flat Sahel plain below. The rock is sandstone, dry, ancient, carved by time. And halfway up that cliff, there are houses. Not caves. Houses, built into the rock face, stacked on top of each other, tucked under natural overhangs. Some of them are still standing after 1,000 years. Nobody fully understands how they were built. The people who made them are called the Tellem. That's not even what they called themselves. That's what the Dogon people called them when they arrived in the region around the 13th or 14th century. Tellem means something close to "we found them here." Think about that name. We found them here. As if the Dogon showed up and these people were just already there. The Tellem had been living in those cliffs for centuries. We don't know exactly when they arrived. Probably around the 11th century, maybe earlier. They built their homes in the most inaccessible spots imaginable. Not by accident, by choice. Some of these structures sit 100 meters up a sheer rock face. No obvious path up, no handholds carved in the rock. Just a wall of sandstone, and then, up near the top, small dark doorways. Researchers have tried to figure out how the Tellem got up there. Some think there were wooden ladders or rope systems that have since rotted away. Others think the cliff face has eroded over time, and it was once easier to climb. There's even a theory that the Tellem were exceptional climbers, almost inhuman in their ability. Nobody knows for certain. What we do know is what they left behind. The Tellem stored things in those cliff dwellings. Grain, tools, and their dead. The Bandiagara cliffs are full of burial chambers, hundreds of them. The dry air preserved everything. Archaeologists have found wooden objects, iron tools, woven textiles, jewelry. Some of the organic material dates back over 1,000 years and still holds its shape. They found something else too. The sheer, staggering logistics of how they honored their dead. Those high-altitude burial chambers don't just hold a few bodies. Some of them are packed with hundreds of skeletons. To get them up there, the Tellem had to have engineered a sophisticated system of ropes and pulleys. They were hoisting their dead, along with heavy pottery, iron tools, and food, straight up 100 meters of vertical, unscalable rock. These weren't primitive people stumbling through life. They had craft, they had engineering, they had a system. Then they disappeared. Around the 15th century, the Tellem were gone. The Dogon people moved into the same cliffs and used many of the same structures. What happened between them isn't clear. Was it conflict? Did the Tellem move south into what is now Burkina Faso? Were they absorbed into the Dogon population? The answer is probably complicated. It's always complicated. The Dogon are still there today. They're one of the most studied cultures in Africa. They continued using the cliff structures for burials. They developed their own rich mythology, art, and architecture. And when you visit the Bandiagara Escarpment today, you see layers. Dogon life on top of Tellem foundations. A living culture built on a vanished one. UNESCO designated the site a World Heritage Location in 1989. It's recognized as one of the most significant cultural landscapes on Earth. But here's what stays with you about the Tellem. They chose those cliffs deliberately. The height, the inaccessibility, the harsh conditions. They were hiding from something, or protecting something, or both. We'll probably never know what they feared. But they built a civilization on the side of a cliff to survive it. And in a way, they succeeded. Their structures are still standing. Their objects are preserved in those dry chambers. They left proof they existed, even if they couldn't leave their name. The city that walked out of the jungle. Colombia. 1972. A group of treasure hunters are pushing through dense jungle in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta mountains. They call themselves guaqueros, looters basically. They follow tips and rumors about buried gold, ancient artifacts, anything they can sell. They find a staircase, not a step or two, a staircase carved into the mountain. Stone, ancient, covered in moss, leading upward into the jungle. They follow it. What they find at the top stalks them cold. Terraces, hundreds of them, cut into the mountain, one after another, climbing toward the peak. Circular stone platforms, overgrown but clearly intentional. Paths connecting everything. A city, swallowed by the jungle, intact. They don't report it to the government. They start looting. Gold pieces, ceramic figures, artifacts that had sat untouched for 500 years start appearing on the black market in Bogota. It takes Colombian authorities 4 years to piece together where the objects are coming from. By 1976, they've reached the site. Archaeologists begin proper excavation. They call it Ciudad Perdida, the lost city. Its real name, or at least the name the indigenous people who know about it use, is Tairona. It was built by the Tairona civilization. Construction started sometime around 800 AD, possibly earlier. It was a major urban center by the time it was abandoned, probably in the early 1600s, around the time Spanish colonizers were pushing into the region. Let's talk about what Tairona actually is, because the scale is hard to grasp from a description. There are about 169 terraces spread across the mountainside. The terraces are connected by a network of stone paths and staircases, the longest of which has around 1,200 steps. The whole site covers roughly 30 hectares. Archaeologists estimate that between 2,000 and 8,000 people may have lived here at its peak. The Tairona were sophisticated builders. They understood water. Tairona has a drainage system designed to handle the heavy rainfall of the Sierra Nevada. The terraces were constructed to prevent erosion. The city was positioned to catch prevailing winds. This wasn't random. It was engineering. They were also goldsmiths, exceptional ones. Tairona gold work is considered among the finest in pre-Columbian America. The pieces they made showed detailed figures, complex forms, technical skill that took generations to develop. And then the Spanish arrived. The colonization of this region was brutal. The Tairona resisted. There were uprisings, there were massacres. Spanish records describe the destruction of Tairona villages, the killing of their priests, the burning of their sacred objects. By the early 1600s, the Tairona had largely retreated deeper into the mountains. Tairona was abandoned, the jungle moved in. Within a few decades, it was gone, invisible from the air, invisible from below. Just mountains and trees. It stayed that way for about 350 years. Here's the thing that makes Tairona different from most lost cities. It was never actually forgotten by everyone. The Kogi people live in the Sierra Nevada today. They are direct descendants of the Tairona. They always knew where Tairona was. They call it the heart of the world. For them, it wasn't lost. It was protected, sacred, off limits to outsiders. When Colombian authorities and archaeologists began working at the site, the relationship with the Kogi was complicated. The Kogi had watched outsiders arrive, destroy, and take. Their entire history with the outside world was one of loss. Why would this be different? Agreements were made. The Kogi are now involved in the management of the site. The Colombian government recognizes their claim to the area. It's not a perfect situation. These things never are. But it's an ongoing negotiation rather than an erasure. To reach Tairona today, you trek through jungle for 4 to 6 days. There are no roads, no shortcuts. You hire a guide, sleep in camps along the trail, cross rivers, climb steep paths. When you finally reach those 1,200 steps and start climbing, the city reveals itself slowly through the trees. Most people who make the trek say it's one of the most powerful experiences of their lives. Not because of the spectacle, though the spectacle is real. Because of the weight of the place. This city was here for 800 years before it was abandoned. It was hidden for 350 more. People built their lives here, raised children, created art, developed a civilization. And the jungle nearly erased every trace of it. Nearly. The Vikings who got there first. For a long time, the story was that Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. That story has been complicated for decades now. Indigenous peoples had been in the Americas for at least 15,000 years. Columbus wasn't discovering anything. He was arriving. But the European timeline gets pushed back further than most people realize. Because before Columbus, before any Spanish or Portuguese ship crossed the Atlantic, there were Vikings in North America. We're not talking maybe. We're not talking probable. We have the physical evidence. We have the site. Meadows, northern Newfoundland, Canada. Right at the tip of the island, on a windswept piece of land, beside a shallow bay. In 1960, a Norwegian explorer named Helge Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist Anne Steen Ingstad, were searching the North Atlantic coast for evidence of Viking settlement. The Norse sagas described a place called Vinland, land to the west reached by Norse explorers around 1000 AD. The sagas were specific enough to be credible, but nobody had ever found physical proof. Helge was following the coastline, asking local people if they knew of any old ruins. In Meadows, a local man named George Decker showed him a series of overgrown mounds near the shore. Helge looked at them and recognized what they were, or thought he did. He came back the next year with Anne and a team. They started digging. What they found confirmed everything. The mounds were the remains of 8 buildings. turf structures, built in the Norse style, identical to the kind of buildings constructed in Iceland and Greenland during the Viking Age. There was a forge, iron rivets, a bronze cloak pin of a type used in Scandinavia around 1000 AD, a spindle whorl, a small object used for spinning wool, suggesting women had been here. This wasn't a fishing camp. This was a settlement, a real one. Carbon dating placed the site at approximately 1000 AD, 5 centuries before Columbus. The Norse had been in North America, not as myth, not as legend, as fact, proven by artifacts buried in the ground. Meadows was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1978. It remains the only confirmed Norse site in North America. Now let's talk about who actually got there and what they were doing. The Norse sagas describe multiple voyages to Vinland. The most detailed accounts involve Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, who is credited with leading the first expedition around 1000 AD. But the sagas also describe his brother Thorvald, and later a woman named Gudrun, her husband Thorfinn Karlsefni, who led a larger colonization attempt. These weren't explorers in the modern sense. They weren't sailing for a king. They were practical people looking for resources. Timber, mainly. Greenland and Iceland don't have much of it. North America has forests that stretch to the horizon. That was valuable. The colonization attempts failed. The sagas are honest about this. The Norse encountered the indigenous people of the region, whom they called Skrælings. The relationship started awkwardly and became violent. Outnumbered and far from home, the Norse eventually left. Meadows was probably occupied for only a few decades, maybe less. The people who lived there packed up and sailed back east. The turf buildings were abandoned. Grass grew over them. Rain fell for 1,000 years. When Helgi and Anne started digging in 1961, they were uncovering a brief, failed attempt to establish a foothold on a new continent. The Norse got there, looked around, and couldn't make it work. But here's what's fascinating about Meadows as a site. It's not just a ruin, it's a ghost of an alternate history. What if the Norse colonization had succeeded? What if they'd stayed? The entire story of European contact with the Americas would be different. The languages, the diseases, the conquests, all of it rewritten. They didn't stay. We don't know exactly why. The conflict with indigenous people was part of it. The distance from home was brutal. Supply lines didn't exist. Every piece of iron, every tool, every person who came to help would have to sail across the North Atlantic. It didn't work. They left. But they were there. And the artifacts they left behind, those iron rivets, that bronze pin, the evidence of a forge that processed bog iron, they sat in the ground for 1,000 years, waiting to be found. When Helgi Ingstad looked at those overgrown mounds in 1960, he was looking at proof that the world was more connected, earlier than anyone had officially admitted. The Norse sagas had been describing Meadows for centuries. Written accounts, preserved in Iceland, talking about Vinland in enough detail to navigate by. People thought they were myths. Turns out they were history, written down before history was supposed to be happening. 3 places, 3 different continents, 3 different eras. The Tellem built on a cliff to survive. Their structures held, their objects preserved in dry chambers for 1,000 years. We still don't know their real name. The Tairona built a city that lasted 800 years before the jungle took it back. The people who remembered it never forgot. They just didn't tell anyone. The Norse sailed to a continent nobody in Europe knew existed, built a settlement, failed, and went home. They left behind just enough evidence to prove it happened. None of these places fit neatly into the history we were taught. They complicate the timeline. They demand you take people seriously who were too often dismissed. West African civilizations with medical knowledge and engineering skill. Indigenous South American cities larger than many European towns of the same period. Norse explorers crossing the Atlantic 500 years before Columbus. The evidence is there. The ruins are there. These places survived because of luck and climate and the decisions of a few people to go looking. The Bandiagara Escarpment because the dry air of the Sahel preserved everything. Tairona because looters found gold and couldn't keep quiet about it. Meadows because a Norwegian explorer believed old stories enough to follow them to the edge of the world. History has gaps, big ones. Most of what happened to most people was never written down, or was written down and then lost, or was written down by people who had reasons to leave certain things out. The real story of human civilization is wider and older and stranger than any textbook can hold. These 3 places are just 3 small pieces of evidence. There are more. That's it for today. If you found this interesting, share it with someone who thinks they know history. They probably don't know these places exist. See you next time.